This is K Anime doing a follow-up to my last Spy Family video, except this time I'll be detailing the 5 reasons why Spy Family isn't worth much of a look through. Starting off, we have reason number 5, which is the fact that Spy Family has a couple of really dumb character moments in the manga. And for this point, I'm mainly talking about Twilight because it's implied that Anya isn't even 6 years old yet, and Yor is introduced as a character who isn't all too bright herself. But for Twilight, he's supposed to be this master spy, and he's supposed to be this incredibly perceptive person, but on multiple occasions, you don't really see that. And it starts in chapter 2, where Yor catches that falling dish of macaroni with her feet, and Twilight has absolutely no reaction to it. He isn't any type of surprised or curious or anything as to how she could do something that crazy. The other people at the party are visibly surprised, and you even see one of them think to themselves, is that it? In regards to Twilight's reaction. And then later in the chapter, during the chase sequence, we see Yor do a really strong roundhouse kick looking move on one of their pursuers, and this time Lloyd has a reaction, but it's pretty mild, and Yor is able to play it off as her brother taught her self defense at some point in their past. And next, during chapter 3, we see Yor do some Spider Man esque wall scaling down this building, and Lloyd is surprised, but he doesn't question, he doesn't think to himself anything in regards to that moment. During chapter 4, during the stampede, you see you're completely disable the pressure points of this raging bull, and she plays it off using the excuse that when she was younger, she learned yoga and learned human pressure points, and so she thought it would be the same for a cow, and Lloyd completely buys it. So 3 chapters in, since her introduction, Yor pulls off 4 incredibly skilled acts, and you can rationalize the first 3, which are the macaroni, the roundhouse kick, and the building, but you can't really rationalize the fourth, which is the bull. With the macaroni, she could have been some type of gymnast or some type of like circus performer or something. So you could rationalize it somewhat. With the roundhouse kick, she can just be a skilled fighter. Like I can see a black belt pulling off something like that. And then with the building, you have like parkour specialists who can perhaps do something the way she did it. With the bull, she unflinchingly stood in front of a raging bull. And even if you know like all the pressure points within the human body, it's one thing to know them, and then it's another thing to completely disable someone using said pressure points. And then it's one thing to do that to a person, but then to do that to a raging bull, that's a lot bigger. It's pretty hard to play it off as just something you learned during yoga. And there are other examples later on in the manga, but it's really more the same. And then we do eventually see Twilight like start to question Yor, but that's only because Yuri is her brother and Twilight knows that he's a part of the secret police. He doesn't question her as it pertains to her past and as it pertains to her training because clearly these are the skills of someone that's highly trained and it isn't something you can just learn in a yoga class or a self-defense class. So the fact that he's supposed to be portrayed as this perceptive, this smart top agent, the fact that all these examples fly over his head and he doesn't question them, it kind of negates that portrayal. At number 4, we have the character Fiona.
When Fiona's introduced, you see her have this desire to replace Yor in the wife role when it comes to Operation Strix. And you think to yourself, you might finally see Yor have some type of foil in the story, just like how Anya and Twilight have their own foils. Anya, her foil is Damien, and with Twilight, his foil is Donovan, who is the central figure of Operation Strix. And with Fiona, we see her question how slowly Operation Strix is proceeding, and you see her have this desire to replace Yor in her role, and you think that this might lead to some clashing between the two of them that could really push Yor more into the forefront of the story and test out her assassin abilities against Fiona's spy abilities, but this quickly is shown to not be the case. But instead, it's nothing but a love triangle, and Fiona's concerns over Operation Strix. They may be somewhat legitimate, but they're nothing more than an excuse to insert herself next to Twilight. And admittedly, when she's really introduced in chapter 30, and you see Anya read her thoughts in regards to her true feelings, Anya has a really funny reaction to them. And you can pull off the love storyline, but to reveal Fiona's true feelings that early into her introduction really doesn't do her any justice. Over the next couple of chapters, when Fiona and Twilight are on their mission together, you see that Fiona is a pretty capable spy in her own right. And then chapter 34, where you see Fiona challenge Yor to that tennis match and Fiona is destroyed. You could have used that as a moment of growth for her to learn from and for her to understand just how big the gap is between Yor and herself. Because we already know the reason she's doing all this, she comes off as looking pretty pathetic, and it's not helped by the fact that we see her storm off in her car and we see the tears falling down her face, so it really doesn't put her in a good light. So, in my opinion, a storyline that could have been used to build up two characters within the manga is instead probably hurts both characters because Fiona comes off as a bit of a joke. And in the next chapter, we see Yor in her drunkenness become a bit unstable emotionally. And we also see more examples of point five of this video where Yor not only completely destroys one of the tennis balls during the tennis match, but she completely overwhelms Fiona in the match, and Fiona just got shown being a really, really skilled tennis player to the point where she beat two former professionals. So the fact that Yor just absolutely manhandled her during this match, but the Twilight, this seems completely normal to him. And then during the bar scene, we see Yor kick Twilight so hard that he is taken off his feet and he's able to recover midair. And you could argue in that moment he's not really in the best headspace to question her. But at this point in the manga, it just seems like Yor's superhuman abilities have just been normalized to everyone around her. So overall, I didn't like Fiona's introduction to the manga, and I thought that her love for Twilight could have been a more understated and subtle storyline for her character. And on a related front, point three is Yor's character before the boat arc in the manga.
Yor very much plays the mother role within the family, and that's not a surprise given her backstory when it comes to her brother Yuri. And in a vacuum, that's not bad. And if all you knew about Yor was that she raised her brother Yuri and they didn't have their parents growing up, and then you saw how she interacted with Anya, your main thought would be, oh, this is so cute and they have such good chemistry together. The main issue is that Yor is supposed to be one of the main characters in the manga, but she often feels like a background figure in the story. Before the boat arc, there isn't anything in the manga that you can say distinctively belongs to Yor, where you can say that she is the central figure in this specific aspect of the manga. With Anya, she's clearly the main figure in the school portions of the manga. And with Twilight, we see him busy doing other various missions, including two major missions with the terrorist dog plot and the tennis plot. We've also seen him interfere in the school aspect of the manga in order to help advance Operation Strix. Yor doesn't really have anything like that, and the most you can say is that she's incorporated in storylines that are centered around other characters. Like I said with point four, if Fiona had been written a little bit differently, it could have helped both herself and Yor, because it would have given Yor a consistent long term storyline where she would have been a major focus. Now I say pre-boat arc because in the boat arc, Yor is the central figure in that storyline. She still maintains her maternal qualities, but we see more of her outside of that role. And in my opinion, it's the best arc in the story. But we'll have to see if she still gets that level of focus now that the arc is done, or will it be more of the same? With the introduction of the garden, there's the possibility that Yor could get more focus in that storyline, but the author still needs to turn the possibility into reality. At number two, we have a point that is overall a positive, but it can be a negative in some aspects. And number two is the release schedule. The release schedule is an overall positive because it helps manage the author's work schedule and stress levels, which is the number one thing a reader should want for any mangaka when writing their story. And there's less of a risk of a Togashi situation when it comes to health or an Oda situation when it comes to work and family life balance. And the release schedule helps maintain the quality of the art, which is one of the reasons I laid out in my last video. But the reason it can be a negative is because you obviously need to wait more time until the next chapter release. And there's also the fact that Spy Family has these intermediate chapter releases like these point ones and these point twos and these point fives that are essentially filler and don't really do much to progress the main plot, but you still need to wait on the same 2 week schedule for these intermediate chapters. As of this recording, there are technically 57 official chapter releases and 11 of these intermediate chapters. And that's a little bit less than a 1 to 5 ratio, which represents a significant chunk of the manga's runtime. So you'll often be waiting a month for the main plot to resume, and sometimes you'll be waiting even longer because consecutive intermediate chapters are a thing. And this can be frustrating for some readers. And the number one reason that I have, and this is a reason that works in tandem with the release schedule, is the fact that some of the chapters can be boring. Now, obviously, this is an issue that can exist in any manga. Action series often need setup for their major arcs. Comedy series don't always land every joke, and slice of life series can sometimes be a bit aimless and go on tangents that aren't interesting enough to keep you engaged in the story. Off the top of my head, some of the boring chapters include chapter 28, which was the introduction of that kid, George Gluman, chapter 39, which is Damien and his two friends going on that hiking trip, and chapter 42, which is centered around the macaroons. Now, boring chapters aren't a fatal flaw, but when you have to wait 2 weeks for a new chapter to come out, being disappointed with the chapter can weigh down your overall experience a bit more because you know that you have to wait another 2 weeks for the next chapter to be released. And if the next chapter is an intermediate chapter, that can also bring about its own disappointment because even if the chapter is good, It's at the end of the day a filler chapter. So for a lot of people, Spy Family might be a manga where they let it sit for a period of time, maybe 6 months, maybe even a year, and then catch up all at once. And I believe that this kind of reading pattern speaks negatively to the overall quality of the series. As for me personally, I caught up to Spy Family over the course of a week, going from chapter 1 to chapter 58.5, which is the current chapter. And I thought that it was a really good read. But going forward, I'm probably gonna have to temper my expectations because the chapters will be out every 2 weeks. So I'm gonna feel the story progression a lot less than I was during the binge. And I'm gonna have to be more accepting of the characters and look more for the positives that they do have. So that concludes this video on the 5 criticisms that I had with Spy Family. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, please comment, and please subscribe to the channel. Until next time.